For me, as far back as I could remember, doubt and faith have always come as a pair, twin companions in a way, joined at the hip. That always made me feel uneasy. I think I must have been told sometime, somewhere, that the goal of faith was to get rid of doubt.
I could never convince myself that I had believed enough.
But what if doubt and faith are not adversarial? What if it is doubt that sometimes carries us to our faith? And what if our doubts are, at least in part, a misunderstanding of our faith?
We've made the mistake of conceptualizing faith as a kind of quantifiable substance where it plays in a transactional quid pro quo with God.
Doubt and faith, doubt as faith. Today on Don't Hold Me to This.
I would love to talk about doubt and the role that it plays in the life of our faith, but also the specter it presents within the life of the community, like the threat that I think some of us perceive when someone expresses a doubt, some doubt related to their faith, or we feel some rising doubt. And then I also want to explore together, like, what are all the catalysts for doubt? Like, as you've experienced it in your own life, I can imagine a number of things that have like issued in something that I would describe as doubt. For me, it has been institutional wounding. So I've experienced some legitimate and significant pain in my life, some hardship related to some action on the part of the church that I was employed with. And when that occurred, one of the outcomes was some level of doubt. But also, like, doubt has arisen from what we might call my devotional life. Like, as I ask God for some relief from some negative situation, or I tell God some hopes and dreams that I have and ask him to bring those about. And when the answer to those things is silence, or is I perceive the answer is a no, it issues in some doubt. And I think some people have doubts that we might categorize as like kind of reasonable responses to the kind of fantastical claims that our faith makes. Like, this man came back from the dead. Oh, well, that's rare, right? That's unusual.
Being born from a woman who was a virgin.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. That's an unusual event that it's reasonable to go, really? I mean, really? Right?
Yeah. There's something out of the area of expectation there, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it seems like there's a couple of things that just maybe I should have dealt with this before we started talking, but one, I wonder what how we even would want to define doubt, because I feel like there's certainly a whole spectrum of possible ways to see something as doubt, or maybe see it as not doubt. And then the other thing is, in terms of where it comes from, I think what you've described does make sense to me. And for me, it's doubt that comes from, I think sometimes it's my own inability to sort of work the program that was given. So in some ways, I think the doubt, you talked about institutional hurt. I think part of that doubt comes from the institutional expectation of faith.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so if you've set up a standard, an institutional expectation of faith that's always a dangled carrot, then what do you do when you never get the carrot, right? I don't know what else to do but to then wonder and question and see that as a doubt that begins to form in my in the whole program, and whether I'm either poorly equipped or just faithless or whatever it is to ever even attain the standard.
Can you Shannon, can you give me an example of that, like that carrot, that dangling of the carrot? Like, what are the ways in which institutions have done that? How would we see it, identify it? What's going on there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think setting up the moral expectation that, like for instance, in your illustration, that you in your devotional life, when you've pled with God for maybe some relief from whatever it is, a grief,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A besetting sin, whatever those things are that we call out to God and ask for healing from, and that doesn't come. I didn't grow up in a tradition that taught this explicitly, but it was still implicit. It was implied that when the answer was no, the answer was no because of something lacking in me, in my asking or in my believing.
Yeah.
And that seemed to always leave the carrot out of reach, right? And some of this has to do with my own, Enneagram 4-ness, which is angsty and internally self-aware. And so I always knew that there were these nagging things that I could never convince myself that I had believed enough. I could always see the flaws in my own efforts or whatever it was. And so, but the system set it up where the way you got the good thing from God is you perfectly believed, or you perfectly confessed where you didn't believe. And I would sit in that and go, well, I can't do that. And that raised the kinds of doubts of and in my faith. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and so then I think the other thing that for me is just that raised doubt, and I think this is also interesting as I think about this conversation, because my doubt, when I think about my own doubts, they tend to revolve around doubt of self.
Yeah, totally.
They tend to be leveraged back onto something I've failed at, rather than primarily doubt that God is good,
Mm-hmm.
right? For instance,
yeah,
or that I have doubted whether that to me. But I would never say it that way. I would only ever say it as I've only ever really felt like God tolerated me,
right?
Which is not very loving, right?
Yeah.
And so the honest truth is I've doubted God's love, and again, I think that's constructed in my mind, not because of something about God, but because of the way the church has conveyed the quid pro quo between me and God in terms of earning and gaining His love.
Right. That the relationship with God that is sort of like mediated by this rhythm of prayer, where we're expressing our pains and we're asking for relief, or we're asking for some help, that it's centrally transactional, and that if it is transactional, then most of the time it's failed. Most of the time it's infelicitous, right? Most of the time it's breaking down, right? If I went to a grocery store, that 8 times out of 10, I gave money for the groceries, but I didn't walk out with the groceries, I'd not go there anymore. Right? Like, I need that to be transactional. And when we take that kind of format and lay it over the relationship with God, you can see that it's sort of a recipe for generating all sorts of doubt when our prayers bounce off the ceiling or don't come back to us with some positive movement.
Yeah. So I think that for me, those are the places that I think about in my own wrestling. Now I've had conversations with folks who who have, I think, the more what we might think is the traditional or straightforward ways of thinking about doubt, which is the resurrection it is a fanciful thing.
Yeah.
And I think it makes rational sense to kind of go, is this real? Is that true?
Yeah.
And so people who find themselves in that place, that makes sense to me.
It's interesting that I just, if I can interject really quickly, sorry to interrupt you. I don't know how to formulate this, so don't hold me to this. I believe in the resurrection because I think it's true. I think Jesus was actually killed, and I think he was actually raised from the dead for the life of the world. But I also believe in it because that's the kind of world I want.
Mm-hmm.
It meets the resurrection and what the story suggests that it will do meets all of the things that I want about the world. Like, when I look at police brutality, or I look at mistreatment of certain groups of people, when I look at injustices of capitalism around the world as children are forced to work in sweatshops, when I look at Canadian truckers silenced for their protests of what they perceived as overreach, when I look at children who die in infancy for malnutrition or neglect, when I look at broken relationships, both individual, personal, and systemic and institutional, what I want to happen in all those places, the right that I want to see made out of all those wrongs, the turning of all of those upside down things right side up, the resurrection promises to do. And in some ways, in what one author called an advanced echo, does it those things already in small ways, not in totality, but in proximate ways. It does and promises to turn the world right side up. And I long to have the world turned right side up. So I believe in the resurrection because I think it's true. And I believe in the resurrection because it promises to make the world the sort of world that I think all of us want. And maybe in some ways, some of us doubt because we didn't know that there's different motivations for believing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's where I think that maps to it's a different angle on something that I'm teasing around in my head, which is I think a lot of this wrestling with doubt may not be doubt of Jesus.
Right.
It may be doubt of the accretions of the church as they've sort of ossified and become, in some ways, untethered from the person of Jesus and the story of Jesus. I think that's a huge. I think there's a lot to be discussed there. But I don't want to simply. I don't want to also. I want us also to hold in the conversation those people who their doubt is, and the writing, the references to the story of Jesus healing a man's son, and Jesus asking if he believes, and the Father answers, I believe, help my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what's in that space between what he means by I believe and help my unbelief. I can imagine that he might be saying I believe, but not enough. Like, I'm not going to go to the bookie right now and put every cent down I have on the fact that because I've asked you and you've now engaged, that my son is going to get up and walk. And I think a lot of times in our struggle with doubt is, and this is where maybe these things collide in terms of kind of the pristine, this is my interior struggle with doubt, and the institutional structural thing, which is part of the reason I pray and have the devotional life you speak of, is because I believe God is able. And so then the doubt seeps into that space of, well, into the confusing space of, well, why not?
Right.
Why not here? Why not now? Why not me?
Yep.
And so I can imagine that father, maybe his belief is, I believe you can do this. I don't believe that. I don't know how to believe you'll do it for me.
Right. I believe that you can. I just don't know if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
So, or it may be, I've heard that you can, and I want to believe, but I struggle to believe. I think that's maybe a fair. I want this to be true, but I struggle to believe that it's even possibly true. That I think that's a fair reading of what might be going on for that father.
Or it might be something like, of course I believe, because what the hell else am I going to do? Like, what other option do I have? Right?
Right.
It's like, I'm at the end of my rope. My son is dead. Like, you're laying out an equation. And what I'm telling you is, I'll do whatever. I'll do whatever it takes. My son is dead. So I will do anything. Whatever. Tell me what you want me to say. I will say it.
Yeah. So I'm doing a thought experiment and putting this question to the woman with the hemorrhage, right?
Yeah.
Because we know she was desperate because she had tried everything.
Yeah.
And what we see in her faith is that it is that kind of, I've tried everything else.
Yep.
If I can just touch the hem of this miracle worker's garment, then maybe I'll get some of that magic.
Yep.
Healing to my own body.
Yeah.
And is that in the institutional part of the question? Is that faith? Is that
right.
the model of faith?
Right.
Is there no doubt in what she's doing? Is there no confusion? And so I think often we set these in juxtapositions. This is one of the first thoughts that came to my mind. I think by the very nature of inviting faith, it feels like you're inviting faith always into the space of some kind of doubt.
Of course. The only way that that's not possible is if I equate faith and certainty. Doubt is only a threat to faith if faith and certainty are synonyms.
Yeah. Which I think that's the failure of the institutional soup I grew up in. I don't want to speak for everybody, and I think there are places I'm sure that do this well and hold these things well. But so faith was a kind of certainty, and that's where the transactional part of it is you didn't get what you were asking for because your faith, the cashier looked at your bill and it's counterfeit, right?
That's right.
Or it's been torn in half and you taped it back together, and she's like, I'm sorry, I can't accept this, right? This is not legal currency. And you're like, well, crap, what do I do now? Because this is all I got.
That's all I got. Right.
Yeah, this is it. And so I think that kind of equating faith and certainty is a that describes the religious Christian world that I have inhabited for most of my life.
I want to explore
Go
that
ahead.
for a second. In what way is the institution being served to have made the move of equating faith and certainty?
Yeah, my gut first reaction. This may be. I hesitate because this may be the low hanging fruit of it. I don't know. This may not be. There may need to be some real spade work to get down underneath this. But I think a lot of the institution, and I'll say this even as a minister, even about the way I operated as a pastor, is there's a lot of natural desire to manage and control outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. If you're gonna do this thing, then you've got it. There's an instinctive impulse within, at least me as a human, I think humans, that if we're going to do ministry, quote unquote, then we've got to know what it means when we're doing ministry and moved from point A to point B with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it serves the church by giving it doesn't serve it well, but it serves that impulse by giving it a sense of I can control outcomes.
Yeah.
If I define it this way. And this is why for me personally, health and wealth kinds of churches, name it and claim it kinds of churches never would appeal to me, because I never had that kind of certainty. And I also reject the notion that the reason somebody's left in whatever the state is that they want out of, it's on them for not having the faith that God requires for them to get the healing that they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I fundamentally reject that. As the way God works, even though its barbs are in my heart in subtler ways.
Sure.
But I think if you do that, then you it's easy to say, here's how you get what you want, and here's why you didn't get it.
And it's sort of like a non-falsifiable hypothesis, right? Like there's just no way to test it. Like if you ask for $10 million and you don't get it, it's because you didn't ask the right way. Like it's just not falsifiable, right? There's just no possible way to test that. It's like immune from any kind of scrutiny, right? And it seems like a faith that says, no, a man really was raised from the dead. Like that is a faith that is not immune from scrutiny. Like you can poke into it. Like this is the whole story of Thomas. Like I'm going to exercise scrutiny so much so that until I put my fingers in the hole in his side, I'm not going to believe.
Yeah, I think in the circles that I inhabit, we have a subtler form of non-falsifiable, which is, or I think this. Here's my don't hold me to this. I think our non-falsifiable is the answer is no in this situation, because God is working something in that no for your good.
Right.
And you're like, that's fine when I'm asking for the $10 million. I can be like, okay, maybe I blow that all on, cigarettes or something. Yeah. I don't know.
Japanese salvage.
Right. But when you're wasting away with a disease, and it's terminal, and then you look at it, and I think this is where maybe I just kind of gave away where I'd love to talk about doubt as a positive, because I think at minimum, and honesty before God requires us at least to acknowledge where we doubt, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the situation of wasting away from a disease, I don't know how to honestly do anything in that space but to cry out to God and say, why, God?
What just occurred to me as you're saying is our problem is that we have located doubt and faith as opposed to each other.
Right.
What I think is maybe more accurate than saying doubt and faith are opposites is that doubt and stoicism are opposites. That the alternative to doubt in a situation where you're terminally ill is to say, well, this is my lot in life. This is the way it is, and I'm just going to deal with it. I'm just going to live with it. If a faith
this is for my good, right?
A totally stoic response.
You're like,
a faith whose most mature expression is stoicism does not have a place for lament. There is no way in which a lament psalm finds its way into that kind of faith. Lament psalm grows out of the soil of doubt. It says, this is the way, God, you've said the world is supposed to be and the way you've made it. This is the way the world is now, even if it's our own doing. Those things are incongruent. Now what? Where are you? And what are you going to do? And why haven't you done it yet? And I think that's doubt. That's what I mean when I say doubt. And lament comes out of an honest contact with the real presence of doubt in our own minds and our own chests.
And in turn, lament is, I think, the very essence of faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, I think that's right. We've set them as a kind of, and I think part of the reason that we do this is because, James says that, if you ask in faith and without doubting, and we, and I'm not dismissing what James is teaching.
Although there is a tradition of dismissing what James is teaching within the flow of Christianity. So I guess that's an option.
I'm in good company if I do, right?
I think Luther,
at least in company.
That's right. Yeah, you're in a company that rightly still calls itself Christian. So
I have friends. So I think, but I think that this goes to, this is a broader conversation or maybe a different conversation, but this again, I think gets back to our need to sort of make the faith and our lives in faith transactional, quantifiable, measurable. And so we take a verse like, if you ask in faith without doubting, and then we beat everything else with that hammers, without also taking that verse. I haven't. It's been a long time since I've exegeted that passage. One, I don't think it means what it seems to say on its face that we're dealing with here. But even so, it's written in a particular context, and it's written in the context of the whole of Scriptures, where we see that, well, the story that we mentioned with the man who says, "I believe, and I don't believe," right? That I'm coming to you at the very same time, and I don't think that person is whatever James means by being double-minded. That man has to actually not fit that definition, because Jesus responds to his faith.
Yeah.
And so I think we do this, one of my other ones is be anxious for nothing, right? And we we think that English translation of anxiety means everything that we could possibly mean by anxiety in our own world, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
And Christians then don't know what to do when they're suffering with a physiological kind of anxiety. They only know how to read it through faith and doubt, because that the Bible has become that kind of manual for the quantifiable, controllable religion, rather than a story of pilgrims who are sometimes merely inching in the
Yeah.
what they hope is the right direction.
Yep. Yeah.
And to me, is faith, but that gets lost in that kind of reading of the scriptures. I think that the way you describe doubt, I think is one of the ways I would use it. But I also think I think it's also, maybe the other side of that is we need to acknowledge that we define. You said faith as certainty. I think there's also a kind of pristination of faith in that definition. I've at times talked about it. We tend to talk about it in terms of quantity or quality, right?
Right.
It's either the quality, the diamond under the jeweler's glass that God is looking at, or he's pulled out his scales. And once there's enough of it to tip the scale, and that then levers whatever it is that we're trying to get from God. And I don't think that's faith either.
Right.
I've been at places in my life where I actually, the places where I think my faith was the most poignant were the places where I would define faith as whatever went into getting out of bed that day.
Right. Right.
And I don't think the church that I've experienced has never honored that as a emulatable kind of faith.
Right.
And yet it was when I felt like faith was like I said, the most poignant ever in my life. When what faith was, I got up and faced the day. I think our definitions and the culture that we inhabit has somehow shaped our definitions of these things in ways that are not healthy.
Hey friends, thanks for listening to this episode on Doubt and Faith. If you're enjoying Don't Hold Me to This, consider liking and subscribing on YouTube or Spotify, and subscribing to our written pieces at don'tholdmetothis.substack.com. It will all really help us out. Okay, back to the show.
I think so much of the way we move through our lives is a result of the way that we conceptualize things that we think of as important, right? So we've made the mistake of conceptualizing faith as a kind of quantifiable substance where it plays in a transactional quid pro quo with God. And if we're suggesting that that's not a healthy or helpful way to conceptualize faith, then what's another way? Like, what do we replace that concept with?
That makes me think back to our first podcast conversation on improvisation. So it seems like to me, so what I want to say now about how I'd want to define faith is it's entering the story and playing your part, gesturing in the direction that you is sort of your best effort at playing your part in the story of God's love for the world, and
without a script, not having the
script.
Yeah,
and that's why, like, I think the story of the father and son is this is all new, right? It's like, Jesus, will you do this? And Jesus, like, well, do you believe? And he's like, yeah, yeah,
Yes and no.
yeah. I do and I don't. I do, help me. He's I can just imagine. I don't know, but he's desperate.
Mm-hmm.
Heard of this man Jesus. So now he's heard this story of Jesus, and he and his story he's bringing his story into an encounter with the story of Jesus, and in so doing, something is put before him that he's never had to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he does is he plays his part.
Mm-hmm.
And says, yes, I believe, and I don't, and help my unbelief.
Yeah.
And at that point, I don't think Jesus pulls out the scales nor the jeweler's glass. He gestures back in a fitting way to the man in his story.
And I wonder if, to bring that back into contact with what James says, what the man who's desperate for someone to help him, what he does is he says everything that's on the inside. If you believe, I will heal your son. Do you believe? Well, I do and I don't. Like, here's everything inside. I do and I don't. And what the person in James is doing is saying, yes, I only believe. When on the inside it's going, yeah, I don't know if I do or I don't. You know what I mean?
Yes, so that's your description of double-mindedness.
That's right. You say one thing.
His double-mindedness is a kind of fakery.
It's a hiding. Yeah, that's right. It's a hiding. And what the man desperate for his son to be healed is the last thing he's doing is hiding.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, and I think if that's true,
mm-hmm.
then I think what the church has done in its either explicitly or implicitly in discussing these things is actually forced people into double-mindedness.
Yeah, into hiding. Yeah.
And that's why I said honesty. I was like,
yeah.
Whatever faith without doubting means, I am confident that what God is not asking of us is to try to fake him out. Oh, that's right. I believe God.
That's right.
I don't think he's asking us to lie about our doubts. Right. That can't. That's on its face can't be true.
Yeah.
And so I do think that what you've described is again, I think that's where faith and doubt become, I think, presented as they are in the story we're talking about, are in that regard they're each is an expression of faith.
Yes.
Each is an expression of, I'm going to posture myself in a way that in some ways just accepts Jesus for who he is and the question he's asked me. And so I'm going to say, yeah, I believe and I don't believe.
Right.
And I think that's really, I think it's interesting to think about how we in ministry and we in the church have actually, in trying to sort of pristinate the idea of faith and doubt in James 1, have unwittingly set people up for the kind of double-mindedness that James warns against.
Yeah, we've made it so that the only alternative to continue their life within the institution is to engage in that kind of hiding. Because what we have effectively done is not eradicate doubt. What we've done is eradicate the space for doubt. We've said doubt has to be hidden and private and shameful because it disqualifies you from being a part of this community. When what disqualifies you is not saying, here's the things that I struggle to believe. Here's the doubt that I live with every day.
Yeah, so I just wonder if you've ever, I've been in spaces where the stated posture is, this is a place for people with questions and doubters. But I just wonder if you've ever seen a space where that was really welcomed and safe for somebody to be honest about their doubts. Because I wonder what that looks like. Because I've been in places where it exists to a degree, but still not in the way that I think we articulate it. And it makes me wonder, why can't the church be a place where why can't we do that? And two, if there are places you've seen where it's done, I'd be interested to know how that culture was fostered so that people who are really struggling in those ways were considered, still partners in the journey of faith.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. What comes to mind immediately is I've experienced that sort of thing in the therapy office or the counseling office. Mm-hmm. And if I can bring that into contact with what's going on in the sanctuary, for example, the worship hall in the church building, in the therapy office, like the energy is genuinely in the direction of the good of the client. And that's the goal. How do we help the client move toward wholeness and flourishing and a life of felicity? The aim is, and the goal really is wrapped up in the individual who's sitting there on the couch. And in the institution, what you have is a kind of competition between the flourishing life of the person sitting in the pew and the longevity of the trappings of the institution, including but not limited to our ability to pay our mortgage and our electric bill and our staff, right? Sure. And so you've got these competing ends that generate a level of fear in the people responsible for guiding and facilitating the life of the institution. I think what it would take for an institution to move in the direction of making space for real, authentic expressions of faith that ring like doubt is a kind of genuine renewal of a commitment to that person's flourishing and to a life of felicity in the kind of faith that they can exercise. I've seen it happen in relational settings over the dinner table, where the goal of the evening is not to achieve a kind of unanimity around the table in terms of the articulation of the points of our faith, but really a genuine coming into contact with each other and who we actually are. And I think that's another thing that the larger institution would have to renew a commitment to. I don't want to come into contact with you as you've faked yourself. I want to come into contact with who you actually are. I don't want to come into contact with some facsimile of you that has no hard edges or shadows, because that's not who any of us are. Let's come into contact with who we actually are, which requires making of space for honesty about who we actually are. The faithful and beautiful things, and the things that are still growing and have a shadow cast over them. I recognize those things present a threat to church as institution whose goal it is to generate conformity and unanimity. I just don't think that's the goal of the church, of any church. And I don't think it ever was. And I think we've become that because in some ways we've constructed our ministerial role as responsible for making sure everyone believes. And the only way I can do that, because I don't have access to the interior life of your heart, I can't see that. And the story of the Bible is very clear that I can't see that, and no one can. And so the only way I can access that is to get you to say the things in the way that I say the things, or say the things in the way that we have always said the things. And that, I think that's where we make the stumble into faith as certainty.
So it brings up another thing, which I think is maybe a part of this, which is I think the way when we talk about faith in this context, our whole conversation has been about faith in an individualistic kind of way, faith as an individual, and faith as an interior kind of psychological thing.
Yeah.
So that's where certainty comes in, because if it's an interior psychological thing, then it seems like it would make sense that its juxtaposition would be certainty and uncertainty, right? Faith and doubt are synonymous with certainty and uncertainty.
Right.
But one of the things that I think has been extremely helpful for me in terms of my own faith is to understand that faith is, in the context of the story of God, it's a corporate reality as well,
right?
Or it's a shared reality, or it's a relational reality. So that in some ways, if we think about the story of God in corporate senses, which it certainly needs to be, is we understand that in the context of any one particular individual's doubt or faith, it's within the community that we are being carried forward and moving forward. As a minister, I've said, you may be in a place of really deep doubt, and that's okay. Your role in this moment may just be to let us believe for you.
Right.
Come along.
That's right.
Bring your doubts along. Bring your doubts along with us.
Right.
As we believe together.
Yep.
This creed, the Apostles' Creed, or as we believe together that Jesus is present with us and for us at this table.
Yeah.
And so some of where the church has maybe lost good strong sense of this, and how doubt might be included in this story of faith is to simply think about faith and doubt as individualistic and and then therefore also transactional between me as an individual self and God, as He is, rather than no, we are in a company of believers.
Yeah, so faith as participation in the life and rhythms of a community,
who are, to the best of their abilities, inhabiting the story of God.
Yeah, there's this wonderful story. We've talked about this before. As Israel has been rescued from slavery in Egypt, and they're right on the border of the Promised Land. And so it's Moses talking to now the second generation after having left Egypt. So the people that he's talking to, none of them ever lived in Egypt. And God says to Moses to say to that generation, people who've never been to Egypt and they were never slaves in Egypt, when you come into the Promised Land and you ask the question, what are the meanings of these laws and statutes? You are to tell the people, and tell the people to tell their children, we were slaves in Egypt. So on the one hand, a kind of cursory, straightforward, on the surface reading of that text sounds like there's some people that are curious about why they're supposed to obey some rules, and their parents are supposed to tell them, you obey the rules because we were rescued from slavery in Egypt. But attending to the groups that are involved and to the grammar that's being used, people who were never slaves in Egypt are supposed to say to people who are now 2 generations removed from having been slaves in Egypt. So they've never even seen Egypt. They didn't even walk through the desert. These are now children born after Israel goes into the promised land. When they ask what are the meanings of these laws and statutes, what their parents are supposed to say is, we, all of us, were slaves in Egypt and were rescued. We are supposed to count ourselves as having been enslaved and having been rescued, whether we ever personally, individually experienced it or not. Faith as participation in the life and rhythms of a God-oriented community, a community that has come from God, made by Him in their having been rescued from Egypt way back in the past, and a community that's on their way toward life with God, even as they live life with Him right now. And they're supposed to call themselves we.
Yeah, and I think that there's one of the just huge benefits of seeing that as a biblical understanding of faith for me personally is it takes away the kind of navel gazing, self-doubting part of how I do the transactional faith. And I want to say this idealistically because I think the ideal is beautiful. I think that the way we live it out is really messy and broken, but the ideal is we're in this together, right? I mean, it's part of why I love the Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter is that it's never about one particular individual. It's about they're taking up this story together. And there's this place in the movies of Harry Potter where Hermione, this isn't in the book, but she's, Harry's about to go face Voldemort, and Hermione says, "I'll go with you," right? And the beauty of the idea that this is something that we inhabit together. And I think the beauty of the idea that when somebody is in doubt, that they can actually believe that it's okay. Like we can say, "We got this. We got you." Yeah. Right? We're gonna step up boldly when you can't.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna, there are days when I will sing the songs, to the back row, and there are other days where I can't emotionally feel I don't feel like I can do it with integrity. I feel like I don't believe this right now.
Yeah.
But I can actually I take rest in the recognition that when I don't have it individually, I have solidarity with these people who are the redeemed of God.
Yeah.
And so then again, I think that goes, we've back to our question of doubt and faith, and some of where it may come from is that we think about it, we psychologize and individualize it in ways that are at minimum they're truncated, right?
Yeah, right.
It's got to be individual. I think there's
sure.
There's certainly a part of this that's interior to any one particular and every one particular individual, but it's just like the rest of the story of the Bible, it's never only that.
Right. So maybe the title of the piece that was the catalyst for this conversation was a question: what do you do with doubt? And I'd love to hear you reflect maybe on a version of that question. I have a sense of what I can and ought to do with my own doubt, but a lot of our conversation has been about the place of doubt within an institutional setting, or at least a community setting. So maybe another way to come at that question is, what do we do with each other's doubt?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've often said that, one of the experiences I've had sort of in small group where these things tend to percolate to the surface in honesty is those moments where somebody actually begins to be honest and pour out whatever those things are. Sometimes it's doubt, sometimes it's whatever. But things that that people in the church, I'll say it as generously as possible, that people in the church often feel like they can't really say out loud. And I've watched it happen where the group, or certain folks in the group at least, it's like the person just caught fire, right? And we just start doing whatever we can to put them out.
Yep. Right.
And so I think the first step is to deal with whatever that analogy of them catching fire and us doing whatever it is to put them out. That's on the hearer. That's not on the speaker.
Yeah.
Not on the one who's expressed what's going on inside of them. That's on the people who are in the room with them. And so I think first is tending to our own selves, and in ways that we can then sit with people in their struggles and in their doubts. And even if it raises our own anxieties, we can at least acknowledge that and manage it for the sake of that person in the room.
Yeah.
And their well-being. But it goes back to your picture of the therapist, right? One of the reasons the therapist's room is so relationship can be so life-giving is they're trained to manage their own anxieties in that space and allow you to be as fully you as you're willing to be in that moment.
Right.
Without reaction. And then also, I think there's an assumption in that relationship that what it takes for your healing is merely guidance for you merely them to guide you in what is already at work inside of you.
Right.
And so I think that learning to allow people to actually be where they are rather than demanding that they be where they're not or where they should be, or feeling uncomfortable that they're not where you think they should be.
Yeah, I was going to say that the first step in learning how to kindly and tenderly and humanely relate to someone else as they're expressing doubt is to attend to where I am, to be in touch with my own interiority. Because the reason I interpret someone who's expressing doubt as though they are on fire and need to be put out, it's more of an expression of what's going on inside me. So the real question needs to be not how do I fix this person, but why do I see them as on fire? Why do I see them right now as burning to the ground when they've expressed it out? Like that has triggered something in me. It's raised my anxiety or raised my ire or raised my anger or raised whatever. And it's a deeper and more important question for me to say, why is that? Why am I so activated when they don't believe something or say something in the same way that I would believe it and say it?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's often the trigger is often that they've transgressed some shared boundary or assumed shared boundary, and you're like, "Oh wait, we don't say that here," and you're like, "Well,
we do now."
Okay, one of us does. So yeah, so I think that's right, and I think tending to that that's this has been a theme I think of a lot of our conversations, which that's difficult work to do.
Yeah.
Even just to acknowledge, oh, this is me. I've got to now pay attention to myself. One of the books that was very, very helpful to me in the early days of after trauma was a book called In the Shelter by Padraig Ó Tuama.
Mm-hmm.
It's an Irish poet. Works in reconciliation and trauma, and he tells his own story, but the title of the book comes from an Irish saying, proverb that says it's in the shelter of each other that we live.
Mm-hmm.
But as he's telling his own story, he relates back to a poem, and kind of the whole first part of the book is about him coming to the place where he could just say hello to here. right? Not hello to where I think I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of um, gravitational pull in the church to in the church community to sort of wistfully, nostalgically, white knuckled, whatever it is, be so obsessed to where we should be that we never are able to acknowledge here. What's so beautiful about Padraig's story is it's in coming to say hello to here that he begins to heal, which is, I think that's just axiomatic, right?
Right. Right.
It'd be like your doctor coming in and saying, "Well, we just want you to be, healthy and have have low blood pressure and low cholesterol." And you're like, "Well, but do I? I don't.
And how do I get there?
Don't tell me what the ideal is. I need you to assess where I am, right?
Right. Right.
Because the only way the doctor can actually bring healing is to come in and say, your blood pressure is high.
Yep.
And the only way you're really going to actually then move to healing in that process is acknowledge that's where I am.
Right.
And I think so much energy is, you said this, that so much, I forget your exact quote, but so much of energy in the life of the church is spent towards perfection, right? The ideal of where I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And what that leads to is always hiding.
Right.
And so, in those spaces, one, just learning that the healthiest possible place for a human to be is here.
Mm.
Because the only way they can grow into what, even if it's just maturity, is to acknowledge that I'm here. And so I think in those spaces, we sort of expect people to play the game of hiding, of idealization of where they really are.
Right.
And again, I think that the step to dealing with that is to acknowledge that that's because I have a hard time being here.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm scared
exposes.
of being...
Right. If I'm trying to put the person out, what that may be, like they're on fire, what that may be exposing is I'm not willing to be honest about where I am.
Right.
And so I can't. I certainly then can't allow somebody else to play by different rules. And I think that's just. So I think the short of that is just good listening and empathy and kindness,
making of space, a kind of recognition of the reasonableness of the doubt, whatever it is.
One of the things that Padraig talks about is that his particular struggle was he wanted to be a priest. He's gay, and one of the things that happened to him in that story was that he's very kind and says these are well-meaning Christians, but they tried to cast the gay demon out of him, right? That was their answer. Learning to allowing the person who's in that space to be where they are and to not see it as your responsibility to fix them. I think that's part of holding space, right? Holding space is to disabuse myself of the perception that my role here is to fix anything, and that goes a long way to creating a kind of space for people to be honest, to be where they are. One of the things I got to where I would say in my own struggle with a perfectionistic kind of faith was when people would say things to me, I would say, maybe that is where I'm supposed to be, but I'm not. I'm not. So what am I supposed to do now?
Right.
okay, I get it. Maybe that's what I should do, but that's not, or maybe that's what I should think, but that's not what I think. So what don't tell me what I should do, because that's not like we play the game of hopscotch and we're like, oh, you should be on this square, so you just hop to that square. It doesn't work that way. And so learning that the human that the pathway to sort of to spiritual life and maturity it's mysterious, and it's often convoluted and circuitous, and it's not controllable by the person on the journey and by the people walking with the person on the journey.
Don't Hold Me to This podcast is a production of Don't Hold Me to This. Music this week is by Marshall Essinger and CJ Harris. Like the podcast, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you are on. You can find out more, do some more reading, get in touch, and subscribe to our writings at don'tholdmetothis.substack.com.